Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kachijian, and today I'm joined by Elisabeth Ohler. Elisabeth is a weightlifting and strength and conditioning coach and consultant who helps organizations to evolve and refine their athletic development programs. Currently, Elisabeth works as an expert in long-term athletic development and youth sports for an executive department of the sports ministry in Luxembourg. Elisabeth studied sports science as an undergrad and is currently a Master's of Science student in sport coaching at the University of Birmingham. From 2017 through the end of 2020, she worked as a full-time coach for the German Weightlifting Federation, first as a manager of the youth department and later as head of talent identification. Elisabeth has a huge passion for rugby and collision sports in general, and has worked as a strength and conditioning coach with the German 15's national team players, leading to the Rugby European Championships in 2019, professional rugby players in France, and youth rugby players on an individual basis. In 2019 and 2020, she interned with the Stormers and Blitzboks of South Africa. Normally, when I host these podcasts, I have a pretty good idea about what questions I want to ask and how I expect the guest to respond. Elisabeth challenged me to consider whether the questions I posed about long-term development were too granular, and reminded me that tactical level thinking only takes one so far in the absence of global and more strategic thinking. Systems offer their own sets of incentives, and without assessing behaviors at the systemic level, we're likely to generate the wrong solutions to second and third order effects of the actual problem. Elisabeth, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. Would you mind beginning by just talking about sort of your coaching journey? And I know that a lot of times your persona online is that you work with mainly with youth athletes. I know that you work with a diverse athlete population, but with regard to the youth population and some of the sports like rugby that you work with, was that kind of intentional or something you just kind of fell into?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, my coaching journey is I would say it's kind of a roller coaster, or especially my professional career in general. Because I've studied something else. I've actually been to law school, and I quit law school to become a coach. What's probably sounds very stupid to a lot of people to quit such a career for working in an industry where yeah, the market is very competitive, and you don't really earn much, and you have to do a lot of volunteer work. But I've chosen that way because I really enjoy coaching. I really love coaching. I really love teaching, especially teaching movements and helping people to get more active and also to perform better in general. So yeah, that's how it all started. It was a couple of years ago where I thought, okay, yeah, I don't want to be a lawyer. So I actually enjoy the sport I do. I was back in the days, I was competing in weightlifting on national level here in Germany, and I was doing it for fun, but I was not bad. I would say I was not really talented, but I was not bad. And I was pretty strong for my very low body weight. So I was competitive in a team. We have like a league or a division system here. Um, it was a bit of pocket money that I could earn with weightlifting during my studies. But I figured out pretty quickly that I really enjoy teaching the lifts, especially the Olympic lifts. And I've always loved squatting. So I don't know. I think everyone should squat. So yeah, and I started in a primary school actually. Like that was the first time I coached. It was a primary school. So primary school in Germany is when kids are between 6 and 10 years old. And we had it was a great project with one of the teachers I knew. She asked me if I want to do some fitness classes with the kids, because they thought they're going to do a project that has like an holistic approach. So it was basically, it consisted of a fitness class once a week, a nutrition class once a week, swimming. So our kids had to learn swimming. And the fourth one was, I think, team acrobatics or something like that. I don't even know. But it was like they had to do these 4 modules over a term, and I was teaching the fitness module for primary school kids, and I taught them a lot of different strength training movements like lunges, squats, snatches, clean and jerks, and we played a lot of games, so the fundamental movement skills, all of that. And that's what I did in the beginning of my coaching career. And then I don't know how, but like people liked what I did, and the German Weightlifting Federation especially liked what I did, and then they offered me a job as a manager of the youth department. That's where I started working at German Weightlifting, so the national governing body. And then the first year I managed the youth department, but I was missing coaching too much, so I switched to the high performance department, and I became head of talent identification and recruitment for German weightlifting. So what I did was mainly, working with young athletes, and also a lot of, we call them transitional athletes now, or talent transfer athletes. So some athletes that, for example, quit some a sport and then transfer to weightlifting. And I was basically in the like doing the groundwork, and during the like as a side, like I don't like the word side hustle, but it's probably called a side hustle. But I've always tried to do more S&C work. So in the evenings I did volunteer coaching in youth rugby teams, in soccer teams. I coached on a private basis some rugby players of the German 15s national team. And yeah, I don't know, that's how I got into S&C and how I got into coaching. And and now I have my own business, mainly as a consultant. Due to the lockdown, I'm not coaching currently, but it's a plan is to do more camps this year, and that's been my coaching journey so far. I did a couple of internships, and I shadowed a lot of other coaches from other sports. I think that's something where I learned a lot about S&C. I shadowed other coaches in boxing and pro rugby. I've been to South Africa a few times, in gymnastics, in athletics. I just try to be all over and try to learn as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it sounds like you have a pretty cool range of experiences, and I want to kind of touch more on the talent identification side of things. You mentioned that you work in that space, and even when we were talking before we started recording, you said that you ended up doing that briefly and you left because you found some of the practices objectionable. So I want to kind of get into, before we get specific, some of like just the philosophical and ethical aspects of talent identification, because you're intimately familiar with that area. To you, who do you think that talent identification, as it's currently done, actually serves? Does it serve the kids or serve the adults who run the system?
Um, I think the main problem with talent identification is that we try to create some elite, high performance, whatever bubble. We want to be elite and high performance and pro and whatever name we can give them, kids, as early as possible. It's sometimes very funny when I get messages on LinkedIn or on Twitter, where someone asks me, "Oh, my kid is a pro. My kid is a pro baseballer, and what can he do as strength training? And he's only 8 years old." And then I'm like, your kid is not pro. Your kid is just a kid. So he's not a pro baseballer. And he's also not elite. And he also doesn't need some high performance, whatever environment. I think we do talent identification because we are obsessed with trying to find potential as early as possible, and also focus on those talented athletes. So I think, especially in soccer or in the Olympic sports here in Europe, we can see that talent identification is done because of they want to focus the resources on the talented athletes. If the ones that are in the system, and especially in those academy systems or in the Olympic training center systems, whatever, if they are really the talented athletes, I question that, because we can't we can't predict we can't predict success in high performance sport in kids. Like, kids have, especially before PHV, they have so much, there's so much change going on over the years, that we can't really predict that success, even though we want to. And I think it serves more the system,
Yeah.
than, and especially all the coaching roles and all the coaching positions in the system. And I say that because I had such a role.
Right.
I basically had a position that was, in my opinion, useless, for, yeah, it was a coaching role, that was not serving that was not serving the actual, or it was not serving, making the sport better, or it was not serving the actual cause. And it was basically to uphold the system. It was to we have this talent identification position, and she's doing stuff, and I think I collected tons of data. I did so many testings and test days, and I drove, I think in 1 year, I drove about 50,000 kilometers through the country to observe and to collect data of children. And at the end of the day, I don't think I could say that I found someone where I found someone that will be an elite weightlifter one day. I don't think so. It was a waste of time, and I think it takes a lot of reflection. Not every position in elite sports is actually a good position, and I could sell it much different. I think I said that to you before.
Yeah.
I could tell everyone, like, I did such a great job. I was like the head of talent identification. I had 10 scouts working for me all over the country and collecting data and whatever. I could sell that. But at the end of the day, I realized for myself that a lot of things that we did, and there was also a learning process for myself, a lot of things that we did was it was not making sense, especially to what the talent ID research, or the talent research in general says, or the sports science research as well. We were actually, the way talent identification is done in many sports at the moment is actually promoting early specialization, and we all know that early specialization is not the way to go for us.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, you
yeah.
raised so many thought-provoking points, and it reminds me, because I'm a new parent. I have a 7-month-old son, and when you have a child and you're a parent, really, whether you're new or an experienced parent, you want to do anything you can to help your child. So when you mention the idea of, like, we can collect all this data and we have algorithms to predict your child's success, that's very appealing to people, and it's very easy to take advantage of impressionable, well-intentioned parents. So like you said, I mean, if you wanted to, with that background, the data you've collected, you could really, really pump that up into something that is very marketable. But then it goes back to what you just discussed, where with any kind of intervention, number one, we're making a lot of assumptions, and there's a lot of uncertainty that you referenced. And one of them is that we know how to identify the problem, or in this case, how to identify potential or talent. And then beyond that, number two, that we know how to develop it. And I don't know that we actually are able to do those things. And especially if we're saying, okay, we're gonna make this call at a very early age, and now we're going to invest a bunch of resources and potentially alter the course of a child's life based on an uncertain decision that we made at a very early age. So there's a lot of problematic aspects to this, and I think that's why, as you discussed, you sort of didn't feel comfortable with it, and you ended up doing something else. And again, to try to get to, like, the bottom of this, for you, do you feel like talent identification is something that has to be sort of deliberately systematized, or do you think that the talent just kind of emerges organically? And if we kind of let kids do their thing with certain constraints, I think that it tends to be kind of obvious which children are talented, but do you think we need a very systematic way of doing that?
Yeah. Um, I think for sports scientists, it's probably great what I did. It's probably great to collect so many data and also see where what physical fitness kids from different sports have, and what like maturation level and whatever. I think for sports scientists, it's very helpful what we did, but it's not helpful for talent identification. And I don't think that this is like, now we don't need it. Like, I don't think the system can develop talents. And I think if we would change the system how it is at the moment, especially in certain sports, talents would automatically develop, and they would automatically make it to the top. But because we are so focused on certain athletes, and we focus on specializing quite early, or we even I know a lot of people are very obsessed now with the multi-sport approach, but they feel like kids must be elite in three different sports. I don't
Right.
think that makes it better.
Yeah.
It's something that really actually sometimes upsets me. Like, multi-sport approach is great, and I'm really a supporter of that. And I think I tweeted that the other day. It's also multi-sport if kids just play soccer
Yeah.
or table
Right.
tennis or whatever with their friends, or if they go out and just run for fun or whatever. That's also multi-sport. You don't need a kid to sign up for three different sports and be constantly coached and go
Yeah.
from baseball season to football season to, I don't know, wrestling season or whatever. That's not my definition of multi-sport approach. So if we would change the system to focus more on physical education, like actual physical education, and physical education is most of the time not what youth SNCs think it is.
Right.
PE is mainly developing or making movement experiences. That's what I like. That's how I define it. And if we would focus more on the traditional physical education, and then and give kids the choice to also play multiple sports in an unstructured environment, I think we would figure out pretty quickly who's talented for what. But because we want everything, even in youth sports, already to be elite, and to have like the perfect environment, and already an elite environment, whatever that means. That's because we have all these issues. I think it was yesterday um, where I saw an advertisement or a job vacancy for a rehab coach in for the under 14s, or from under 10s till under 14s. Why do under 10s till under 14s need a rehab coach?
Right.
Like, why?
That shouldn't be a full-time job for some parents.
Like, nah, it shouldn't be a full-time job.
Yeah.
Like, and I wonder why people don't question that. And I always wonder, like, why people apply for such jobs. Maybe I understand, it's if you have to pay your bills and you do that, it's fine. But you got to question the system if you have so many injuries at under 14
Totally.
level, that you need a rehab coach, whatever that means. It
Right.
was not a physiotherapist or whether it was a rehab coach. And yeah, I think uh, the system in general is, if we would change that, then talented athletes will always develop. Like, they just, I always call it the factor X. Like, we don't really know what it is, what is so special about them, what's so special about them, but they have something special, and that's something you see. It's also something like you gotta have like a feeling for it. I don't think data can, or data collection and data analysis can even see that factor.
No, I mean, I think that the key point that you made was that we often hear about people advocating for this multi-sport approach, but they don't elaborate on the fact that playing multi-sports, like you said, does not need to be structured, because if people are going from, playing baseball 6 days a week, if they're pitching, 5 days a week, and then they're playing football, every single day in the next season, I think that structure is probably what's interfering with the development, because we always assume that we actually know how to help people and that coaching is always a good thing. But sometimes there, especially at an early age, I think there is a place for just letting kids figure things out. Um, so for you, I mean, you mentioned like more emphasis on true physical education as a way to alter the system to promote real talent identification and athletic development. And I know that in the US here, like a lot of the schools are cutting physical education to make more room for, math classes and science classes. And it's always one of the first things to go. I don't know what it's like in Germany or in Europe. So I agree that physical education is important. Where do you think kids should be getting it? Should they be getting it in the schools? Should they be getting it privately? Because once you take it out of the schools and it goes into the private sector, then it becomes the kind of thing where it can be sort of a money grab. And then
Yeah.
the way to differentiate yourself as a, and now we're kind of going in circles here. Like if we're trying to market ourselves as physical education coaches, instructors to parents, that early specialization, collecting data is a way to appeal to that audience. Whereas if you say, look, we just want kids to play in a somewhat safe and moderately structured environment, that doesn't appeal as much as saying like we're gonna make your kid elite right now at 5 years old. So how do we incorporate physical education in a responsible way, and where does that happen?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's the same here in Germany. Like PE is the first class that gets cut, and we also have like a lack of PE teachers in general. And yeah, one of the, or that has actually been or I was lucky that I knew a teacher who asked me if, because the first project in a primary school I did, it was basically because they didn't have a PE teacher, and they asked me, do you want to do that, because otherwise we don't have PE here, and you're at least a coach, and I've studied sports science with more like a pedagogical focus, and can you, maybe you can do that, and then we don't have to, then these classes don't get dropped. And that's how I got into the school, or into the school system. So I basically replaced a PE teacher that wasn't there. So I think school, like, we can't change. I think from our perspective as S&C coaches, or we can't change the school system. I've tried that while I was working for German weightlifting. I tried to I try to cooperate with the Ministry of Education here in Germany. That didn't really work out very well, because the school system, it's just that it's too much effort to change anything there. So if we put it to private, then we have like, then it's really dependent on the coach what he or she does. And I've always been very lucky that I never dealt with parents that were overly excited about a career in pro sports for their kids. It's also, I think, especially because of my weightlifting background, I've had a lot of kids in my courses, or in the camps that I offered, um, that were not good enough for other sports. And so the parents didn't really care that much about it. But I see the risk in private facilities to not do PE,
Right.
because the majority of strength and conditioning coaches doesn't really know what PE is. and we are very quick with overcoaching, and we are also obsessed with overcoaching. And I think it's also something that I had to learn, to be careful about what I upload on social media, for example, because not all of my kids always have great form, and there's so quickly there's like a,
Yep.
it's mainly physios that jump on me for and they're saying, oh, there's a round back here, and we have like a lordosis there, and that's not good, and
While
you
they're
have
snatching with the PVC
this
pipe.
and this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mainly physios that do that.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yeah, but like kids play, and when they play on the playground and they jump off something, they probably gonna have a knee valgus too. So you gotta give them time to learn that, and you gotta give them time to have proper landing mechanics and proper running mechanics, and you have to give them time to learn techniques and skills. And sometimes it's also good if they just try out something. And I'm not gonna stop a kid that's like, I'm not gonna yell at a kid on the playground, oh, watch your knees. I'm not gonna do that. Like, I don't know why it's always expected from coaches in like the gym environment to overcoach everything. And I think a lot of S&C coaches don't really have a clue about what PE is. I think it already starts with program design, because if I look back at or if I think about how I design programs, I don't really think much about exercises or games or whatever, and I'm really good at improvising that on the day, dependent on how the kids feel, and if they had a tough day at school or whatever. um, I design my programs for kids based on learning goals. I make it based on what I think they should learn, also from maybe a social point of view or a psychosocial point of view. So I don't really care much about exercise selection or game selection or whatever. It's more, I base my programming around what I want them to learn. And it's not the exercise. It's most of the time it's also something like, okay, I want to have like a decision making, or some decision making processes this session, or this session I want them to do as many like object control, or as many fundamental movement skills as possible. I want them to take maybe risks. I want them to get in contact with other kids. So that's like how I design my program. It's not that I say, okay, we want to play this game, and then we do squats, and then we do this exercise and this exercise. So I'm more like, okay, this session, I want them to take some kind of risk and maybe make decisions. So maybe we should do like an obstacle course where they have to jump off something, or where they have to jump against like a rope and then swing or whatever, where I have like that risk taking aspect. So I think we should weigh, I think that's how program design for kids is should be, or in my opinion, that's how it should be. And not, okay, we're gonna have like a squat progression now, or we're gonna do like, we start with goblet squats, and then we add like the PVC pipe, and then we add like the kids barbell. Nah, that's not it.
Right.
Like that's not how you program for kids. Yeah.
Yeah. And then with regard to early specializations, I think there are some sports, and maybe I should use the word earlier, not early, because we could take things too far and go too early. But what are the sports, in your opinion, that do require earlier specialization where, if you don't really focus on that sport after a certain age, you're not likely to be competitive? Because I want to be fair. And I think that most team and field sports are, more conducive to that long-term athletic development model that we're referencing. But there are other sports where if you don't do them early enough and you don't develop technique and take advantage of that neuroplasticity earlier on, then you're probably not going to be that competitive. So what do you think are those sports that require earlier specialization, and maybe the ages where it's responsible to start focusing on them?
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think some sports are, or some sports are, or you have to specialize early in some sports because the system makes you
Okay.
specialize early in those sports. And it's not because the sport itself requires it, but the international competitive level requires
Good
it.
point. Yep.
And I think if we would change certain rules on international level, we would also change when kids or when young athletes specialize.
Right.
So if you look at gymnastics, for example, um, we have like a lot of, especially in Asia or in the Eastern European countries, we have kids already on elite on international elite level when they are like between 14 and 17. And because it's allowed, and the system and the rules allow it. And we don't really know what would happen if we, for example, say we on for world championships or Olympic games, you are only allowed to start when you're over 18. And if that would change the actual
Hmm.
our actual perspective on, if is it really is it really a sport that needs early specialization. I think it's the system that allows it to happen. So it's from my perspective, of course, in gymnastics or in in figure skating or diving or all these more technical sports, obviously they are specialized a bit earlier. But do we actually know if these athletes would be able to be on a competitive level later on? If we don't even know that, because we are so used to specializing them early. And it's something that I don't know if there's any science or research about it. I haven't found anything yet, but I would be really, really interested in that. um, if we could maybe change that over changing the system, or if we just gotta go with the flow, because other countries also have other values, and other countries also have a different approach on leading and coaching athletes. And we actually adapt to that with the way we are doing, or we actually adapting to that. um, I question, especially one sport that has been really on my mind, where I'm still confused if it's a late or early specialized, or where early, or if early or late specialization is necessary, swimming. Because we currently have 16-year-old girls that swim world records. But at the same time, if you look back a couple of years ago, um, like the peak age was in the beginning of the 20s. And then all of a sudden we have a couple of very, very young athletes that are able to hit that level. And is it because and I always wonder, like, is it because they that good? Is it because they have specialized that early, and they swam so many kilometers already, and
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
they are that good on that level? And if it's, and I think you also have to question, is that actually what we want, like from an ethical perspective? Do we
Totally.
want a 16-year-old winning Olympic medals? Is that what we want? Is that also what the audience wants to see? Is that what we expect? Or But I think, especially probably also in the US and in Germany and in some other countries, we have some ethical approach on that, and maybe question that. I'm not sure if other countries do it. And that's maybe, that's maybe controversial to say, but I don't think other countries even ask that question.
I mean, again, there's so much to unpack there, because even the way that I phrased the question, I think kind of speaks to my myopia here, because we always assume that things are the way they are, and it's a very like micro tactical level question to say, well, what sports require early specialization versus what you're taking a much more global approach and saying people might be doing this because the system doesn't offer any choice. And maybe the system is a lot harder to change, so nobody's bothering to ask that question. But I don't really hear anybody talking about that. Like maybe if we had a different system with different incentives, then things would be, wouldn't be the way that they are. And with regard to swimming, as you know, it could be that those 16-year-olds are just complete outliers, and no matter what they did, they would break world records at an early age. But as you know, everyone's going to overreact and say, well, if it's appropriate for these two people, then everyone should be doing it. Now, all of a sudden, now we're going to try to get like all young swimmers to try to compete internationally at an earlier age, and it's a knee-jerk reaction. So again, I think it's a very complicated question, and I'm not saying that like the system needs to be totally, you know, begun from scratch, because we don't know if that's true either. But we have to at least have these conversations and ask these questions. But it's hard because there's a lot of financial incentives. Like if you can produce a 16-year-old world champion, like there's a lot of money in that for a lot of adults. But even if a 16-year-old is capable of that, to your point, I mean, is that desirable? Like a lot of adults live vicariously through kids, and it's like, well, it must be great for that kid, but maybe like there's a downside to all this kind of success, all this scrutiny. And I don't know if you've read the book Open by Andre Agassi, but he talks about how like when he was a tennis prodigy, like he actually hated tennis, but he was just sort of forced into it. And later on in his life, he reconciled some of those childhood issues, and because the game actually like enabled him to meet his wife and have a family. So it sort of worked out. But we don't know, even on a philosophical, ethical level, if we force people to be successful, even if they're talented, if that makes their life better, right? So there's just so much to ponder there. But thank you for that, because even I'm kind of like my head is spinning right now with all this stuff.
That- it's a general, I think it's a general thing. And I also had to learn that, and I'm still like, there's so many things that I'm not sure about, and I question what I do, I think, every day. Because I think we in sports, we very often, especially in youth sports, we think that we know what's fun for kids. We
Right.
think that we know what kids want, and we don't really have a lot of participation of kids in the actual system. So I've experienced that at German weightlifting as well. I tried to implement a youth athlete in the board, so he could make so that we had like a young athlete um, representing the other young athletes, and also sharing ideas and what they think is fun. And we actually had like a group of minor athletes that we asked, what do you think, like how should we change the competition system in weightlifting, like what do you think would be fun, like what would you enjoy in like the in competing, like what's missing. And it's like, I've noticed in the beginning that a lot of them are completely overwhelmed when you ask them for their opinion, because they are so used to going to sports, and they get offered training, and they get offered that whole system, and the competition or whatever. They don't really feel like they can actually have like, they can actually participate in it and change it, and make, maybe also progress it and develop it. And I think that's something, if we really want to have less dropout, especially on an early age, we need to listen more to what kids actually want. I think it's very often it's much different than what we think. I think, yeah, I've wrote a blog about it for Simply Faster the other day. It's not published yet, about what is it really fun for kids, what we do with them in youth sports? Is it really, do they expect us to play games all the time, and have like a great facility, and having all those, maybe also tech, and going on camps, and is it really what they think is fun, or is it what we think is fun? And I don't like I've been in that trap as well. I've
Yeah.
also I thought, okay, I'm gonna organize an amazing training camp with, oh, we're gonna do this and then we're gonna do that, and they're gonna have so much. They're gonna meet an elite athlete, and that's gonna be so great for them. And actually, they didn't care. Like actually, they didn't care. And if I look at all the feedback forms that I handed out afterwards, it's like random things that they know, that they always note what's important to them. It's like important for them who their training partner is. It's important. It's one girl once wrote, and that was really, for me, that was really yeah, it was actually kind of sad. She wrote, "Oh, I liked it here because you didn't yell at me." And I was like, how, like, how's your training going at home when you think that it's awesome that someone actually doesn't yell at you? And I think we need to ask kids more what they actually think is fun, but they are so caught up in the system. And like, I thought for a very long time it's arrogant to say that, but a lot of kids just came to my training or came to my camps because of, like, not because of what we did and all the sports or the fun activities or whatever. They came because of me as a coach, and the other two or three coaches because they liked us, and they came because they met their friends, and they were away from the parents. And that's what kids actually like enjoy. It's not the sport itself. It's more like the whole environment and how
Yeah.
someone treats them, and how, if they feel respected. That's, for example, something I figured out. If a kid doesn't feel respected, and if you only talk down on them, you lose them very quickly. And I think we need to ask the questions more, because the dropout statistics are really devastating.
Yeah, and on the one hand, it's energizing and it gives me hope having this conversation that people like you who are kind of thought leaders in this area are asking these questions. But the cynical side of me is depressed because I mean, I kind of feel like it's going to get way worse before it gets better. And I think that, that like kids are going to be wearing HRV monitors and sleep monitors at a younger and younger age. We're going to collect more data on them, intrude on their privacy. And I think it's going to take something like almost like a public health epidemic before like it's changed. That's just my opinion. And again, it's depressing, but it also, like I said, gives me some hope that people like you are fighting the good fight on this. But yeah, I just see it getting crazier and crazier. I don't know.
Yeah, the thing with this approach is, and that it doesn't really sell.
Yeah,
It's something from a marketing perspective, and it's not something that would sell. And if I would, for example, advertise a pro day or a training camp for that's similar to a combine, or like, for example, the NFL
totally.
combine, and or I would sell a speed camp for primary school for 8-year olds to run faster in football or whatever. That would sell. But is that the right thing? That's the question.
Yeah.
And that's something that's something that sometimes even let me not sleep at night, because I'm like, okay, you could do it different, and you could sell, especially with my weightlifting background, I could sell a lot of things, um, like with a more performance oriented approach. And I could sell people like, okay, you gotta teach your kids the Olympic lifts, because they're gonna be
Right.
the next NFL, NBA, whatever star, and it's gonna help them in their athletic development and stuff. I could do that,
Yeah,
but
if you did force plate testing and did Olympic lifting and showed the data, you killing
yes,
it.
I
Yeah,
could do that, but I feel very uncomfortable doing that
yeah,
because it's not for the kids. And like, I always felt like, okay, you do this job for the kids and you do it for the athletes. And I think the athlete-centered approach is really something that has been missing in a lot, like in environments. it's not that everyone, like there are a lot of great coaches out there that do amazing work, and they're also, but I think it's the general approach, especially from parents, and also the system, that makes it a bit harder to, yeah, with the approach that I have. For example, if I just advertise a weekend camp where I focus on movement experiences and just having fun, and like, of course we can do lifts, and we can go to the gym, and we can, like, kids are very, like, what kids think is fun is sometimes really different from what we expect. So kids can have fun lifting weights, they also can have fun learning a snatch technique. I think a lot of kids that I coached really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah.
But we did that for like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and the rest of the time we did something else. And it's it doesn't sound like good though.
Yeah.
It's sad that I say that, but yeah.
No,
The
and there's so, I mean, like I said, we could talk about this forever. I mean, maybe just to shift to something a little bit more concrete in your work with weightlifting. And I think that, again, this is not a conversation about like weightlifting per se. I think weightlifting is a proxy for other things, and more just kind of, coaching principles. But if you look at a lot of youth sport development, right? Like sometimes the constraints of the game and the environment promote the development without a lot of coaching. So kids, for the most part, when there's other kids around and they're playing, they intuitively know how to run, change direction, how to throw implements. And not to say that there aren't technical aspects of that, but for the most part, like I think a lot of coaches agree that we don't need a lot of technical intervention when it comes to those areas early on. Weightlifting is a pretty technical sport, and like the idea of saying, okay, like the constraint is I want you to pick up this weight from the ground and put it overhead in the most efficient way possible with the most weight. That's not necessarily like giving somebody that task doesn't always promote the best technique. It does require some coaching, but at the same time, you're working with kids who a lot of times have limited attention spans. So how do you make kind of weightlifting
Mm.
playful and allow for sort of a constraints based and a fun approach, while also kind of reinforcing technique, which is really important early on?
Yeah. So first of all, like that's also a question I asked myself, if that's necessary to do with kids.
Yeah.
I think yes, or not necessary, but it's nice to do if you focus on if you focus on the right things, like especially when if you take the snatch now. I always looked at it, okay, it's something that I teach them where they really have to focus on what they're doing. They have to develop focus, concentration, and doing a task as precise as possible. So that's why that's the main reason why I started teaching the snatch. Of course, I have a weightlifting background, and like I like the lifts and stuff, but the main reason for me was, okay, we have like all these playing games, and we have like some of them even play other sports, they play soccer or basketball, and that's all very, like, yeah, that is already very playful. But I was like, okay, we take the snatch, and what the skill we teach them is, first of all, to focus, and to focus on learning a new skill, and also to be precise in different positions. So my approach has always been, okay, I take the movement, we have the first position, and I always call it one, so they all of them know the numbers. One is the starting position, and we have the first pull, that's number two, ends at the knee, and we have number three, that's in the when the bar touches the thigh for the first time in the snatch, that's in the upper third of the thigh. And then we have like the turnover, that and we end up in the deep squat, that's number four. And then we have standing up, number five. And I teach kids, you have to, like, your body and the barbell has to be at this position in number one. They have to your body has to move parallel, for example, in the first pull. So the barbell is at that place, and your body is like at that other position, at position number 2. And then you have 3, and then you have 4, and then you have 5. So what I can do is, if I have like a whole group, I can do, like, I call it position training. So I'm counting, like, okay, we start at 1, we go to 2, we go to 3, we go to 4. And then we start from the beginning again, and we go from 1 to 2 to 1 to 3. So it's more like teaching them, yeah, it's teaching them the focus, and teaching them where their body has to be in a certain movement. And I think that worked very well for me, or it worked very, very well with the kids that I worked with. And it's something to mix up. It's something to mix up training. Of course, when I share something on social media, a kid lifting, I think a lot of people think that that's the only thing we do, but it's maybe 10 minutes of the actual 1 hour session, or of the 90-minute session. Then it's maybe 20 minutes that we spend on actually learning technique. I think it's very important for kids to learn something that's complicated at first, and learn it, to break it down in different movements, and teach them, okay, your body has to be there, and then it has to be there, and then it has to be there. And to especially also develop that ability to focus on a task. Um, and the rest of the time you can just play and do other things. And it doesn't need to be the snatch. You can also take like another difficult movement, for example, from gymnastics. So it's basically the same as like if you would teach a gymnastics movement. You
In
also
terms of like being more receptive to learning, do you find that kids are more or less receptive to learning something like Olympic lifting than adults? I mean, they're obviously they're primed neurologically for motor learning, but again, there's like more communication and cognitive issues. So how do you reconcile those things in terms of who do you think tends to respond better, having worked with all kinds of athletes of different ages and abilities?
Yeah, I think weightlift, or the kids that I've coached in weightlifting, were mainly kids that didn't like team sports that much.
Mhm.
And I know that a lot of people can't imagine kids not like, as that there are actually kids that don't like constantly playing games and doing a team sport. And um, I've worked with a lot of kids that really they wanted to see progress and learn something new just by themselves, and not being dependent on anyone else. And that's why I've started with teaching them weightlifting techniques. um, and compared to adults, I found it always much easier to teach weightlifting techniques to kids, because they don't overthink that much.
Yeah.
They are very they don't overthink the movement. You just show them, and they kind of understand it better. They also, I've never had a kid that was scared of going under the bar, because it's that kind of risk taking that they still have. A lot of adults actually have that problem, of moving their body under the bar in a snatch or in a clean. I think if you've learned something like weightlifting techniques very early, it's going to help you a lot from a coordination point of view, and also not just from athletic development perspective. Um, I like coaching. I like teaching weightlifting techniques to adults as well. I do a lot of workshops, but it's definitely different than coaching it to kids. Kids are they learn much quicker,
Yeah.
and they also what they do is like, or what I've noticed over time is they learn it much quicker in a session, but sometimes they completely forget what you've done until the next week.
Okay.
And then you kind of have you spend like 5 minutes most of the time to remind them what we actually did last week.
Right.
And it's like it comes back, but it's very funny to see that they forget such stuff very, very quickly. And adults, when I coach 1 week, then I already know that they thought the whole week about what they did wrong until the next week. And then
Yeah.
yeah, we have to do a lot of mental work as well.
It helps too that kids actually like have mobility and can get into those positions
Yes.
too.
Yeah, that's probably one thing, especially when working with primary school kids, or when they like 7, 8 years old. They don't have a problem going into a deep squat. So I haven't done any power movements. So I don't teach kids a power clean or a power snatch. We always do the full movement, because they also don't really understand. For them, a power snatch, for example, is something completely different than a full, like a snatch into the deep squat. So I've always just done teaching them the full lift from the beginning. That's something you can't do with adults. With
Yeah.
adults, you have to go over power position and then slowly go deeper. Then you have that problem with the deep squat and lack of mobility, and but they actually want to do a full squat, and then
Right.
you kind of like, yeah, your squat is not that ready for a deep squat, for a or for a snatch, and not into
Yeah.
that position yet. You have to explain it to them. Kids don't have that issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for people who maybe like don't work with that many youth athletes, what are just some general coaching principles, practices that you employ to improve communication and connection with kids?
Um, I think it's simple language. And it's also one of the things that I've also in the beginning, I underestimated that. It's try to understand their world, even though you don't really relate to what's going on and what's important to them. And try to at least understand what is important to them, and what, like, how their world is. I think one of the experiences, or one of the experience I've made is, well, kids are on TikTok, or on they use Snapchat and social media very differently maybe than we do. And I think if we gotta be very relaxed with such things. So I think I had one camp where we actually practiced a TikTok dance. Like, it's not on the internet, so no one will ever see me doing a TikTok dance, but I practiced that with them. And after that, they thought I'm the coolest person in the world, because I was the first adult that did a TikTok dance with them. And all of them wanted to come to training after that. So it had nothing to do with training or the sports, but it was like they thought I'm like so cool because I did a TikTok dance with them. And it's like it's trying to understand what they like, what their world is, because their world is different than ours, even though there are a lot of things that we don't like. And I know that we don't like them using such apps, and as adults we don't like them being so active on social media and being on their phones all the time. But it's part of their role, so we got to deal with it, and we got to use it maybe to our advantage as well. So one of the things that I always I think is very important when working with young athletes is try to relate to their worlds. Let them play music, what, even if you don't agree to that hip hop, whatever stuff that they listen to, but it's something where you generate a lot of buy-in.
Yeah.
And like maybe the third thing, like, yeah, simple language, I already said that. It's don't overcoach. Let them figure out stuff themselves. If it's not a very difficult technique, it's also completely fine if they figure out certain things themselves. um, and don't overcoach, and don't make them reliable on your coaching. It's something that I've seen a lot with young athletes, that also especially in the gym, They do, for example, an exercise like a squat, and the first thing is they're looking to their coach and for reassurance or for getting feedback, and they have to learn to listen to their own, like to their own, or they have to give their own feedback and be reflective and figure out what was a good movement, what was not a good movement, where could I be better. They have to learn that themselves. It's the same applies to a sprint start or a jump. They have to know what was a good rep and what is not a good rep. And when you constantly overcoach, then they don't learn that.
Right.
They have to get a feeling for movements. And yeah, that would be my top three uh for young coaches. I don't know if that's really helpful, but
No,
kind of
it
like
is. Yeah. And I think that now the strength and conditioning world is going to demand the TikTok video of you dancing. So
no one's ever going to see that, but it's something like it's something that if you stand there as a coach and they practice, like that was during a training camp, and when they practicing that and you just like look like you think that's super stupid, or you watch them and you think that's ridiculous or whatever, or you tell them to do something else because TikTok is such a horrible app, you don't get them on your side. You
yeah.
really don't. It's even though we don't like certain things about social media and what they're doing and like how they interact on social media, it's still part of their world. It's you so you gotta kind of find a way to adapt to that and be cool. Like that sounds so stupid to say that, but like be cool, because it's something they will tell you, like they will, after the like a year later after that training camp, no one actually knew what we were doing when everyone was remembering me doing that stupid TikTok dance. So I don't know, that's something, yeah, it's,
Yeah. You've got to live in reality. Right.
yeah.
All
I
right.
don't know if that's professional though. But it's not on it's not on the internet.
Well, yeah. And
But
then who's the arbiter of what's professional anyway? Right.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, where can people learn more about your like your consulting work and just where to find you and connect with you?
Yeah. So I tweet a lot. So I'm on Twitter. It's EO Performance. I have a website. I do, like at the moment I do a lot of consulting for organizations or clubs, especially developing like athletic development models or programs. I do professional development or education for other coaches, especially with all, I don't like saying that, but with all the soft skill parts, like how to make sessions fun, or how to communicate with young athletes, how to communicate with kids, especially um, because I think there is enough about the hard skills on the internet, or there's enough content everywhere about development and LTAD and athletic development, but it's not really, a lot of kids, or the majority of kids cares about how you coach, how you talk, what is important to develop. Can you actually make a session with young athletes also educational? Can you maybe also teach them how to communicate with other athletes? That's something that I'm currently working on, is to figure out, like with an organization, to figure out how can we, for a team sport, how can we teach them earlier to give feedback to their teammates, not just receiving feedback from a coach, but also processing feedback and giving it to others, so that you communicate better on the field, for example, and have players that are better in decision making and players that are better in working as a team. So that's something I'm very interested in, that I do workshops on that. And yeah, you find all information on my website.
Yeah, well, you've been really generous with your time, and I appreciate this was a very thought-provoking conversation, and I hope people reach out to you because there's a huge need for these kind of services in our field. So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Resilient Performance Podcast. As a thank you for listening, please use promo code PODCAST for 10% off our professional development resources at resilientperformance.com. Also, make sure to sign up for our mailing list to receive exclusive content and promotions.